Where We're From highlights the rich textures, histories, and experiences of the Asian, Pacific Islander, and Desi American community. Each episode is produced by students at San Jose State University.
Greetings, dear viewers. Welcome back to the final episode with the BMW crew. Here to share and tell once more, we have Jason, Mariah, Diana, Taylor, and I, Ray. In this episode called Discussing the Events of Vincent Chin, we will be aiming to better understand everything that happened during this time, as well as both the effects beforehand and afterwards that rippled throughout the entirety of the U.S. Taking it away for us will be Taylor.
Hi guys, thank you for sticking with us through our final episode. As mentioned before in the previous episodes where we talked about the devastating impacts of the coronavirus and the idea that immigrants are stealing jobs, we see how fast propaganda can spread and how quickly people act on it, resorting to violence. Through several incidences, we have seen how corrupt our system is and how violent the people are that live in it. So many innocent lives have been taken away because of the biases and discrimination that are ingrained in our system. People always want to pick someone to blame. In the cases of our previous episodes, they chose Chinese Americans to blame for the poor job system and again when COVID happened. Americans have attacked the oppressed groups because they believe they won't fight back, and they have also listened to those in power who are unlawfully spreading propaganda, which in turn is hurting innocent lives.
Yes, building off of what Taylor said, our system has embedded deep-seated biases and discrimination. As we have mentioned in our previous episodes, we have seen the dangers of microaggression, the use of propaganda, and the violence that Asian Americans have to endure. Because our system continues to hold these thoughts, we have seen, as discussed in episode 2, an increase, especially during 2020, where Asian Americans have been getting attacked. This also has to do with the resurgence of Asian Americans stealing jobs because of the downturn of the American economy during that time. This is also something that connects to our past, the Rock Springs Massacre event. As we have seen in past events, it's remarkably easy for American workers and Asian American workers to become divided.
Building on our earlier discussions, the themes from episodes 1 and 2, historical and modern scapegoating against Asian Americans, are reflected in the murder of Vincent Chin. In episode 1, we discussed the Rock Springs Massacre, where Chinese laborers were violently attacked because they were seen as a threat to white miners' jobs. Asian Americans are still accused of stealing jobs in the modern day, particularly during economic downturns, as we discussed in episode 2. The murder of Vincent Chin served as a tragic reminder of this pattern. Auto workers who blamed Japanese automakers for job losses against Chin, despite his Chinese American heritage. This historic background illustrates how scapegoating of disadvantaged communities is often a result of economic concerns. What can we do to break the cycle of violence that these narratives reinforce?
True, it is very difficult to have the cycle be broken to a degree, especially considering it appears the media does not help with some of these ideas. In fact, it was this sort of rhetoric that influenced the occurrence of the murder. The economic state of Michigan at this point of time was a very disastrous one, causing many workers to suddenly be losing their jobs during the early 1980s. What was once a prosperous area of industry for mechanics and factories and auto workers was now being called the, quote, Rust Belt, or also known as the Rust Buckle, as Detroit and Michigan during this time was the worst economic downturn area of the entire Rust Belt. And according to some sources, it was also said that a multitude of jobs were being lost due to multiple economic recessions during this time period. Additionally, cited by the LA Times, by December 1982, a staggering 750,000 people were out of work in a state with a total population of just 9 million. This was the leading factor of people getting desperate, and it caused those affected to start becoming violent, and therefore looking for someone or some group to blame. Ultimately, this led to the accusation of the Japanese that were causing this, which would further lead to all Asian Americans' lives being in peril due to the average American not being able to differentiate Asian backgrounds being different. Knowing the situation, I believe it is very clear that it was irrational anger that led to the scapegoating of the Asian American community. But could the media have done anything to deter it? But, however, Jason, could you elaborate more on the murder itself?
Absolutely, Ray. Vincent Chan's murder shows how scapegoating can lead to real violence. On June 19, 1982, Vincent, a Chinese American, was out in Detroit celebrating his upcoming wedding. Tragically, that night ended in a horrible attack. He ran into Ronald Evans and Michael Nitz, two white men who had lost their job in the auto industry. They were angry about the economy downturn and blamed Japanese car company. Even though Vincent was Chinese, they directed their anger at him, yelling racial insult and accusing him of being the case of the comeback. The situation increased to another level, and they brutally attacked Vincent Chan with a baseball bat, leaving him seriously injured, and he died in a few days after. Taylor, can you explain the detail of the judgment, such as what happened to Evans and Nitz after the process? How do you think this outcome impact the Asian American community at that time?
Thank you for explaining this, Jason. And yes, I will gladly explain the details of this poor outcome. The worst part about this entire case is the fact that the two men responsible for the murder, Ronald Evans and Michael Nitz, got completely left off the hook. After pleading guilty to brutally murdering Vincent Chin, Judge Kaufman only sentenced them for 3 years of probation and a $3,000 fine for murder. This goes to show that the justice system is corrupt and that the people in it have been easily abusing their power. Throughout history, they have only cared about people who are white or white passing and do not care about minority groups, as we've seen this happen many times. And to answer your question about the outcome and how it impacted the Asian American community after, well, this event actually got hundreds of people to protest the trial's outcome in Detroit. They tried fighting for what was right because no one else will. Vincent's mom even traveled around the country sharing his story in hopes that she could help other families who have gone through similar events.
The murder of Vincent Chin was a horrific one that Chin even mentioned in his last words, "This is not fair." The shocking sentence of probation, as Jason mentioned, for such a violent murder did not remain hidden. Even without widespread news coverage of Chin, his story resonated deeply within the Asian and Chinese American community. People were scared, saying if this can happen to Chin, it can happen to any of them. Just by going out, they faced the risk of being yelled at, and as they have seen, they could also be murdered. Despite Chin not being mentioned in the news, the sentences of Evans and Nitz were publicized, sparking protests around the country. Aside from the Asian and Chinese American community, multiracial and multicultural communities showed their support for them. In the following weeks of hearing the sentence that was given, activists formed the Pan-Asian American Civil Rights organization that called American Citizens for Justice, otherwise known as the ACJ. Diana, can you explain what the ACJ did?
Yeah, so like you said, when the murder took place, there were a number of civil rights activists that took action, such as the ACJ. After the murderers of Vincent Chin were given minimal sentences, Asian American groups around the world protested. These protests were some of the earliest examples of Asian Americans from many backgrounds coming together to demand racial justice. The establishment of organizations like American Citizens for Justice advocated for the murderers to receive worse punishments. The murder of Vincent Chin helped pave the way for stronger legislation. The impact of the murder on civil rights was crucial to highlight the power of collective action. However, it is horrible that it had to be a murder that provoked these civil rights movements.
It is heartbreaking that it took such a terrible tragedy to awake the needs of change, but it also showed the power of united action and what can happen when communities come together. Vincent Chan's murder wasn't just a single event. It becomes a turn of point that united Asian American in a way that they haven't been seen before. It sparked a movement that demanded accountability, justice, and accounting with the racism and violence Asian American face. The legacy of the case reminds us of the process often comes to a high cost, but it is also a highlight the importance of standing up, speaking out, and refuse to stay silent. Vincent Chan's story, painful reminder of how far we came, but also how much further we need to go. It is up to all of us to continue to the fight of justice, ensuring that story like this isn't forgotten and his legacy to inspire the future generation to push for the further and a more justice world.
Thank you for going over that, Jason. It is disheartening that it appears that only when a major act of violence occurs, it ends up being the thing to unite and cause push for equality. However, this entire situation does demonstrate that, much like the Rock Springs Massacre to today, economic struggles start to put pressure on those affected by it. Because of this, the people who are affected want someone to blame in order for themselves to be alleviated of the pain. And as we went over in the previous episode, it echoes to the same idea that people get violent and desperate, and whatever they perceive to be the quote right idea often ends up hurting innocent individuals who are just trying to make a living. But now we do have some reflection questions to give yourself something to think about as we wrap up this episode. Like, for one, if this murder had never happened, would there still have been the same pushes for the defense of individual rights? And do harsh economic times encourage or cause a higher rate of hate crimes such as this? And additionally, is it possible for there to be some sort of social reform without a major event taking place? I do believe that is it for us, though. Thank you to our wonderful listeners for tuning into each of our episodes, and we hope it left you a little more knowledgeable than when you came into it. This is from the BMW crew. Thank you once more, and bye!
Thank you for listening to Where We're From. This podcast is produced by students enrolled in Dr. Joanne Rondilla's Asian American Studies courses at San Jose State University.